On this channel, we've covered many ships that vanished at sea without leaving a trace. Stories like the Pacific in 1856, or the Lord Spencer, who likely smashed into another ship during a nighttime collision, or the White Star vessel Neuronic 20 years before the sinking of the Titanic, or the Waratah, also known as Australia's Titanic. But today, we're looking at the inverse of that. Ships that became wrecked, but no one knows who they are, what their stories are, where they came from, or who their crews were. Shipwrecks that just appeared but left us no traces about their origins or how they came to be in the places they were found. In some of these cases, it doesn't make sense that there's even a shipwreck where it is. It's weird that there's cases like this, and you have to wonder if there's any overlap with the missing ships we've covered in these cases. This video is all about Australia, and I remember that the Madagascar disappeared around there. And this isn't a phenomenon that no longer happens. This list I found of unidentified shipwrecks covers sightings, stories, and discoveries of wrecks from the 1840s all the way up to just over a decade ago in 2011. And the fact that all these are in Australia is a little concerning. How dangerous is it to sail around there? Also, there's only a list like this for Australia, so that's also concerning. That there needs to be a list like this especially for Australia. I mean, I know it's like the meme that everything in Australia wants to kill you, but that's also not a joke. There's big sharks, giant crocodiles, and not a place I'd want to be in a shipwreck. I could easily see how a ship sinks along the coast, no one survives, and thus the identity of the ship is lost. So with that in mind, these are the stories about the unidentified shipwrecks from Australia. Found throughout history, these are the forgotten mysteries. I found this to be a fascinating thing, so we're going to look at the whole list today, starting with an unidentified ship from 1842. Okay, so this one is concerning. Like, there's no context, but apparently everyone was dead. This is the Orangutan all over again. Great. So, an unidentified ship was first sighted when it floated onto a reef near Mount Ernest Island. And then the very next detail is that everyone was massacred there. Yeah, Spino, this one jumps from 0 to 101 very fast. Like, that really is the next detail. There's like 3 sentences about this case because we don't know what happened. So, the solo occupant remained on the vessel after it struck the reef. Why there was just one guy, I don't know. Where was everyone else? Was the rest of the crew just gone? The next details of the ship, which I'm guessing given the time was probably a 3-masted sailing ship, or maybe something smaller like a schooner, drifted free at high tide and then ran aground on Mount Ernest Island itself. The vessel was then promptly looted, the sole remaining occupant was massacred, and that's it. That's the whole story. From reading the story, it sounds like it was just one person that was massacred when the ship actually drifted to shore following striking the reef. By 1929, some of the timber of the ship could still be found along with its rudder, but there's nothing past that one mention. Alright, so let's break this one down. First, with how vague it is, it took me a few times to get the details straight. First time I read it, I thought everyone was dead when the ship hit the reef, but after rereading, I don't think that happened till afterward. I don't know, this one is super vague with the details and is super strange. It's just a ship that was unidentified and everyone died. Either way, everyone is dead and the locals looted the ship. The outcome is the same. I tried finding more information about this one, but there's just nothing. It's just a weird story of an unknown ship that ran ashore with a dead crew, and then the only one left was killed. Then the ship was looted and forgotten. To this day, no one knows who this ship was, where it came from, or where it was going. I can't even find a detail of what kind of ship it was. Now, looking at a list of missing ships, I can't even find one from the area that matches up date-wise. The nearest one is the missing Resolution in 1832, a decade off from this event. So, who knows where it even came from? If it wasn't local to the Australian region, which it doesn't seem like from, again, lists of missing ships in the area from the time, I checked all the local areas and there's nothing recorded, then it'd probably be impossible to track down due to just how many ships disappeared back then. It could have come from anywhere and been going anywhere. And I can't find an exact date either, a month and a day, just 1842. So that's kind of useless because there were literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of shipwrecks in 1842. Good luck narrowing that list down. I think the only way we would ever know is if an archaeological search for the wreck uncovered pieces of it and they were dated so we could get an age or maybe even a location of where it was built. So looking at a list of known missing ships, I don't see any ones from the area listed as going missing around Queensland in 1842. And without further details, narrowing down a suspect from ships known to be lost in 1842 will be all but impossible. But let's look at a list that focuses on shipwrecks in Queensland itself and see if any occurred in 1842. So what do I think for this one? Well, assuming it wasn't the Kraken or the Sea Serpent the HMS Daedalus crew saw that resulted in the ship wrecking, I'm thinking probably pirates if the massacre occurred out at sea. If it happened after the ship ran aground, again, vague details, looters on the shore, land pirates. So, sea pirates or land pirates, they're all pirates. But this story is just one of 12 that we're covering. So let's move on and see if we can't have better luck figuring out who the next one is. North of Brisbane, Australia, is an area off Fraser Island known as the Breaksea Spit. In 1869, workers who were building a lighthouse were informed by the Aboriginal natives local to the area that there was a shipwreck about 4 miles from the Breaksea Spit. At the side, the remains of the ship were a timber hull, which was buried upside down in the sand, along with several other items such as tea, bars of soap, part of a box of candles, and bottles of gin. So it seems that it might not have been very recent, it might have been there a while, and if it was, then good reason to build a lighthouse, even though it's a bit late at that point. Though, considering the soap seemed intact, maybe it was relatively recent, who knows? It might have still been in boxes or heavily weathered, there's not many details about the wreck. The state of the soap, though, would give us a clue as to how recent it was, but we don't get that. We just get vague details again. I think this is going to become a pattern with these. I wonder if this one couldn't be, if it wasn't some cargo ship, then maybe it was what was left of a wooden-hauled passenger ship that disappeared around that time. We'll probably never know because despite everything found, the wreck was never identified, and even if it still exists is unknown. There might be some parts of it still buried in the sand if marine archaeologists would go look. That's the end of that story. Again, there's no date I can find beyond 1869, and again, that's a problem for narrowing down suspects because, like with the last one, there were literally hundreds of shipwrecks in 1869. There's like hundreds in December alone, and without a clue to the ship's identity, it could have come from anywhere. And that's assuming the ship sank that year when it was found, when in reality she likely sank sometime prior to that, which doesn't help. So cross-checking a list of missing ships again, there's some that are within a decade or two, such as the Phoenix in 1850, the Elizabeth Radcliffe in 1850, the Reindeer in 1862. The Burma was a passenger ship that vanished en route from London to New Zealand in 1859 or 1860, so that would at least put it on the right track to be in the area, except for the fact that it was way south of Australia. It'd be strange if it somehow ended up in northern Australia somehow. I don't think it would be anything older than those because of the fact the soap was apparently still in full bars. And it would have to be more recent if the soap was just lying on the sand, but I don't know if it was. But the fact that the soap was intact makes me think the wreck was relatively recent. So let's look at a list specifically covering known ships lost in Queensland, where Fraser Island is. For this, to help me out, we'll limit the years we'll consider to 1860 through 1869. So, starting off, scanning a list of known shipwrecks, there are literally none that match. I widened the scope and looked at a list of all ships lost in 1869. I really tried to find some possible ships this one could have been, but there's just no way to narrow it down just using 1869, Again, there were so many wrecks that year, it's literally hundreds per month. I really explored the lead that it could have been the passenger ship Reindeer, but I could find no information on that ship either. So, same deal, I guess. To possibly narrow down a point of origin, the wreck would need to be found again, and samples would need to be studied. I can't see this ship being one of the ones that vanished in the area decades before, like the HMCS Integrity, which maybe could have gone north around Australia while heading to Chile. Why they would, I don't know, when east is a straight shot. In my research, there was not a single ship I found that this could be. Nothing at all. What is this ship? Is this an Indiana Jones mystery? Because there is nothing on lists of missing ships that match, no known ships that were lost that match, and no ships known to have been wrecked in Australia even come close to the date. I feel like, with all that, it had to come from international waters somewhere, but where? That's the million-dollar question. This has to be one that was thought to be lost somewhere in the completely wrong area than it really was. That's the only conclusion I can reach from this. This ship was thought lost somewhere completely different than it actually ended up. My only real conclusion that I can make is that this ship was likely wrecked or capsized hundreds of miles away from where it ended up, and that is why no known missing ships or lost ships match with its location. In 1973, a piece of a ship was sighted off the shore at Orchid Beach in Australia. An unidentified vessel was spotted just offshore of the island. The wreckage included a cannonade and a timber spar. Today, the wreck is still there. It is buried deep beneath the sand, but occasionally does surface, with the most recent time being back in 2002. Given the fact that it had a cannonade, I'd say this might have been a Navy ship, likely a British Navy ship. So, let's check the list of missing ships again and see if we can find a suspect. The city of Holbert disappeared off Tasmania in 1873 and possibly could have drifted north, but I think that was a passenger ship, so I don't think that's our ship. The problem with having no idea of a year is that it becomes so difficult to find suspects. And once again, there were literal thousands of shipwrecks in the 19th century, which is when I'd guess this one is from. So I have no way to narrow it down without more details. It could have come from anywhere, been anyone's ship. The wreck is in Queensland, but even then it's hard to find a suspect. There were lots of Royal Navy ships lost in Queensland in the 19th century. Most of which have documented areas they were lost in, and none match. A few are unknown, like the Lady Bowen in 1894, whose location is not known, and a few ships that were abandoned at sea could have perhaps drifted to Fraser Island and come to rest there, such as the Royal Navy vessel HMS Mermaid in 1829, which struck a reef and was abandoned, and as far as I know, not recovered. So maybe she drifted free and then sank here? Who knows? This is all guesswork based on the few details we have, which again is just timber and a cannon. But there is a silver lining to this story. Since this one still exists, for sure, it might be able to be identified, or at least narrowed down to suspects if it was dug up and studied. Maybe one day that'll happen, and if an area of origin can be narrowed down, or a date of loss can be narrowed down from analyzing the remains, then maybe we can narrow down a suspect from known ships that were lost in the area in the 19th century or the early 20th century. Finally, one that, while not officially identified, we think we know which ship this is. So, in 1976, a storm struck the InSkip point and it exposed the remains of a 19th century wooden sailing ship. The wreck was between Rainbow Beach and InSkip Point, and it has been seen since this original exposure, as recent as either 2002 or 2003. The wreck is believed to be the bark St. Magnus, which drifted ashore following a storm just over a century earlier in 1875. On March 18, 1875, while on a voyage to Brisbane with a cargo of grain and produce, the bark St. Magnus was lost in a hurricane and buried on the shore after becoming wrecked. It is unknown how many of her crew perished in the disaster. But that's all there really is to say about this one. While not officially identified, it seems that most historians agree that the wreck is most likely the St. Magnus, so mystery solved for now. Well, this one's the opposite of the last one. There is literally nothing about this one. The only information is that in 1999, a wreck was reported to the Maritime Authority. And all it consisted of were several anchors, spars, timbers, chains, and a few other debris, and a sandstone ballast. Without any further details, such as a possible year of loss or just an age, it wouldn't be possible to even begin to try and narrow this ship down from those few details. The Independence was a ship lost in Australian waters in 1805, assuming that it was a 19th century ship. But again, there's no way to narrow down who it could have been from those details. Also, the Independence was lost way south of any of these wrecks. If the remains were analyzed and a date of sinking determined, then maybe we could narrow down suspects from known missing ships. But until then, we have no idea what her story is, along with the story and fate of her crew. Until we get a date, this one will remain nothing but vague details and a whole lot of unanswered questions. That's fair, Spino. But there's also the sandstone ballast likely means that the ship is way older than any of these other ones. Sandstone ballast tanks were like 15th century, so who knows where this ship came from. I'm just going to state the facts for this one because apparently there are no known ships that could have wrecked in this area at all. In 1999, a fisherman discovered this unidentified shipwreck on the eastern side of the North Ledge Reef. No records, though, we have explain why a shipwreck is here or where it came from. All we have are a heavily scattered debris field, some debris even getting as far away as 50 meters from the main wreck. The debris includes an iron ballast, a cannon embedded into the reef itself, which makes me think maybe a World War I era battleship. There are also iron fittings and an iron water tank that sits just above the waterline. Haha, very original, Spino. That's all the details, though. Who the ship is unknown. There are no theories. An unknown wreck was found at the Jervis Reef in 1999, not to be confused with a wrecked French ship that rests on the northern side of the reef. This one rests on the southern side of the reef, and all it consists of is an anchor chain and stone ballast. Great. Like with some of these previous ones, without analyzing the remains and determining an era of loss, or even an age, or, year of construction, anything, narrowing down suspects is impossible. It could have wrecked any time, and we've established how many ships were lost in the 19th century alone. This one is probably older, though. The stone ballast makes me think something between the 15th and 19th centuries. Which also doesn't help narrow things down. We really need a year of loss to have a hope in identifying this wreck, or, at least narrow it down. Without that time frame, I can't do much when it comes to checking lists and looking for suspects that match. Until then, there's just no story with this one, and no way to try to reconstruct one or theorize about one. Without a year of loss, we really are groping in the dark. With some of these, we can narrow down an estimated from details of the wreck, but with such vague fragments being all we have left of this one, we can't even begin to guess until it's further studied. At least with a year to go on, we can look at ships lost in the area and try to guess which one it might have been, create a suspect list. Until then, we're just going to have to move on to the next one. Yeah, me too, Spino. On an island only 1 mile long is the remains of an unknown wrecked ship. Found in 2000, an iron-hulled shipwreck was located off the island, 7 meters below the surface of the water. Though technically still unidentified, this one is the second wreck we've covered that has a likely candidate for which ship it is. Which, after those last few, is nice. It is believed that this ship is the iron-hulled vessel Gertrude, a ship lost near the island in 1912. The wreck itself consists of an intact bow, which actually sticks out of the water at very low tides. There was also an anchor still attached to the bow as well. Some other pieces of the wreck that remain are sections of the ship's iron hull and various other pieces of the ship's structure. I really tried to find details about the Gertrude, but there's nothing that I could track down. Even on websites that archive shipwrecks, there's nothing. Even the Queensland Australia Museum didn't have much about it. But either way, the ship is believed to be identified, though it's not officially identified. It seems that this is the only one it really could be. There are literally no other known candidates for who it could be, so let's move on to the next one. In 2004, a wreck was located offshore of the Pearling Station at Goods Island, an island in the Torres Strait of Islands. This one is intriguing, but again it is a case where we know absolutely nothing, which is starting to drive me mad. There's no details about when it possibly could have sank that we can use to narrow down which ship it is out of the literal thousands it could be, but what's interesting is what the wreck consists of. The wreck consists of stern posts, wooden ribs, hoop pine wooden planking, and what really got my attention, something a little more tangible than timber and an anchor. There is what appears to be a diesel engine in the wreck. That is interesting, and that is something we can start with. Diesel engines got widespread use on ships in the very early 20th century. 1903 is when the first diesel engine came into use on a ship with the diesel-electric river tanker Vandal. So, we can assume this wreck likely comes from sometime in the early 20th century, between 1900 and, we'll say, 1920. So, what ships disappeared in Australia around this time? We'll start this little investigation by assuming it's a ship that is missing and not one that is known to have sunk. The Amy Louise is a ship that disappeared in 1909, somewhere between Brazil and Sydney. Could the ship have gone around the northern side of Australia and gotten wrecked? I can't find any details on the Amy Louise, like if it was a sailing ship or a steam engine powered ship, so I'll leave that one in the maybe pile, and probably not pile as well. There's a lot of ocean that one could have disappeared in. But after checking the list of known missing ships, that's the only one that really fits. A lot disappeared around Tasmania at this time, but that's not where we're looking. So we'll assume it's a ship that is known to have sank in the time frame. There's still hundreds it could be. So we're still in the same boat. We can only narrow it down to probably the early 20th century for when it sank. Until it's properly studied and dated to a likely year that it sank, I don't think I can riddle this one out when there's hundreds of suspects, but the diesel engine being in the wreck is very interesting. I read through a whole list of shipwrecks in Queensland to see if I could find which one this was, and it's not any of them. Then I did find something. In 1923, the wooden-hulled coastal steamer Douglas Mawson disappeared in the area where this wooden, unidentified wreck is located. I'm just throwing that out there. What if this unidentified wreck is that missing steamer? That's a little too much of a coincidence for me to just write off. So, with that little intriguing head scratcher at the end there, I'm going to move on to the next one. Hi, it's Enderman with a lowercase e here. I hate to interrupt, but I have to say something real quick. You'll notice if you go to the list I'm covering that I skipped 2 wrecks right here. That's because when I wrote the script, I accidentally merged them together into one. Whoops, my bad. And I decided to just cut the whole section of the video out. The 2 I messed up was the second wreck at Goods Island and the one at Collis Beach, Prince of Wales Island. Somehow, I accidentally merged them into one when writing this video, and I didn't notice until I was editing the final cut of the video when I was putting the chapters together. So my bad. I just wanted to clear that up. I'm sorry about that, but I thought it'd be better to clear it up than just cut that whole section without explanation. Maybe I'll share the messed up blooper in the future, but I thought it was best to just remove it rather than leave it in when it was wrong. Again, it was 2 shipwrecks in completely different places that I accidentally merged together. So there was no way to salvage it. All right, on to the last wreck. Sorry again about that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. The final and most recent one on our list today. Resting some 30 meters off the shore from Hinchinbrook Island are the remains of a wooden ship, the wreck of which is some roughly 30 meters long. That's 98 feet if you live in America like me. It's okay, I didn't know either. So, wooden ship, suspected to be from the 19th century. Well, once again, we have a familiar problem. The fact that there's literal hundreds it could be. Literal hundreds! I get why these haven't been identified. The suspect list is longer than the RMS Titanic itself. Heck, printed out, it would probably be longer than all 3 Olympic-class sisters lined up bow to stern. I wish I could tell you the story of this ship and these others, but it's hard when there's literally hundreds that it could be. Yes, Spino! Okay, let's at least check and see if there are any missing ships from the 19th century that it could be. Let's check the list of missing ships. I feel like these wrecks are more likely to be in this category because if it was a known ship that went down, we would have an idea of a ship being in the area. And someone also would have had to have lived to tell the tale. But if it's a missing ship, then no one lived to tell the tale. And we have some that might fit the bill. The Amelia, a wooden brig from the early 19th century, comes to mind. She was lost in 1816 on a trip from Sydney to Java. And I put her on this list because she would have likely swung up around Queensland on this voyage. Since we do not know where she was lost, perhaps her crew navigated her to this island because of an issue, or she simply became wrecked there while on the voyage. There is no way to know. There is no way to know who this ship is with only a wooden wreck being what we have to go on. If it was studied and an age or date of loss could be narrowed down or heck even determined, we could at least begin to narrow down some suspects. But until that happens, this ship's identity will remain unknown. Imagine if it was the Amelia, though. Man, that'd tell a story. But it's probably not, for the simple reason of, once again, there's several hundred possible suspects for this wreck's identity. Looking at a list of known wrecks around Queensland, I can't find a match from known ships that have gone down around the area either. And I want to address this little fact now that we are at the final shipwreck of today. I don't think any of these ships are ships that are known to have sank, because no one survived to tell where these wrecks were or who they are. I think most of these are missing ships that disappeared and took all hands with them, or ships that were abandoned and drifted to these places where these wrecks are. But while I can't be sure about that, it makes the most sense to me over them being ships that were known to be lost in specific sinking situations. I think to find the identities of these wrecks, we need to look for known ships that went missing or ships whose records just kind of abruptly end, kind of like the Hurricane from our last missing ships video. I plan to keep looking into these. Maybe I'll even do a process of going through the literal hundreds of suspects with the ones on this list I found most interesting, and in a few months I'll come out with a part 2 on my suspects of who these wrecks are. Until then, though, let's wrap this one up. And those are the unidentified shipwrecks of Australia, and all the information about them that we have. For many of these, I wish there was more to cover about these ships, but there's just not. Since they're unidentified. I'll leave that little blooper and you might laugh. Since these are unidentified, their stories are unknown. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed the video and what little information about these ships that we have. I find this whole phenomena really interesting. It's one thing when a ship disappears and is never found, but it's a whole other thing when we find wrecks, but we don't know who they are or where they came from or how they got there. It's just strange that this can happen and their whole story not be known. or their origin not be known, or anything about them. Heck, some of the ships we covered that disappeared might be on this list that we just went through. Again, the Madagascar vanished sometime after leaving Australia, so who knows? I wish I could have really narrowed some of these down, but unless you have a look at the list I was looking at, I don't think you can understand just how hard that is. When I say thousands of ships were wrecked, hundreds per year, hundreds per month on those lists I was looking at, that's not a joke. And in these cases, when we have just timber and an anchor that, could have been down there for over 100 years, it's impossible to narrow down the suspects without having them analyzed and getting a time frame for the sinking, or a possible location of origin or a date of at least being built. If I do my proposed project of trying to narrow down some of these, I'm only going to do it with the ones that we have more details about, like the split apart steel-hulled ship, the one I thought could be the Douglas Mawson, and so on. And not any of these that all we have is a mast and an anchor to go off of. By the way, I got very excited when I made that connection to the wreck at Goods Island with the Douglas Mawson. Like, I wish you could have seen my face when I was writing the script. I was, like, jumping. I really did get super excited for that, and it felt like the mystery was actually getting solved for me there. I swear, if that wreck ever gets identified as the Douglas Mawson, I will have the greatest "I called it" moment of my life. Anyway, this was a really interesting topic to research, and if there are more unknown wrecks around the world like this, I would absolutely love to cover them. Let me know if there are other lists like this one that exist. And with all that said, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found these mysteries interesting and that you'll like and subscribe if you did, because it really does help me grow and lets me know that you like this content and you want to see more like it. With that said, I also hope you'll check out my other documentaries about shipwrecks. I'll link a few in the description. You all seem to really like these maritime mystery videos, so they will absolutely continue to be a regular thing, and I hope you'll stick around for them and my other content. So before I go, I'll let you in on the next topic. Part 5 of what I might say for a lot of you is a favorite. Missing ships. With Volume 5, we're going to be getting into the really obscure ones that I'm certain you've never heard about before. These stories are the ones almost no one knows about anymore. So with that cryptic teaser, I'll sign off for now and see you all in Ships That Vanished at Sea, Volume 5. Thank you for watching, and have a good one, everyone.